opportunity to have a say. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we'll let you know when it's your turn to speak. Please make sure that you speak as clearly as you can and at a steady pace, not too fast, because there is live BSL interpretation. Our BSL interpreters, Sarah and Richard, need time to interpret. If you would like to ask a question in BSL, please raise your hand and we will make sure the interpreters can see you before you ask your question. Our captioners, Norma and Julia, will be typing live captions which you can see on screen. If you'd like to see the captions on your own device, there are posters around the hall with the link to the live captions and the Wi-Fi login. Inclusion London staff are wearing a white t-shirt with the blue Inclusion London logo. If you have any questions or need help with anything, please ask us. Fire safety. The fire alarm in this building is a continuous ringing bell. There is no, sorry, it's a continuous ringing bell, bear with me. Sorry.
Like, probably have to come this way. Yeah, a bit. No, just.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'll move back. Sorry.
What it is before you weren't. Anyone watching the live stream is not seeing. Okay, it's fine now, right?
Okay. Fire safety. I'll repeat, fire safety. The fire alarm in this building is a continuous ringing bell. Test bells are every Friday evening at 6 p.m. If you hear the bell ringing today, it's a real emergency and you should leave the building. I will now hand it over to the candidates who can introduce themselves and make their opening statements. Can you tell us 3 things you would do, if elected, to make London a more inclusive and accessible city for all deaf and disabled Londoners? You have 3 minutes for your opening statement. When you hear the bell ringing, that means time is over. If you would like to start.
Good afternoon, and my name is Rachel Blake. I'm standing to be the Labour Member of Parliament here in the cities of London and Westminster, and I'm representing Sadiq Khan, Labour's candidate to be the Mayor of London. Can I just start by thanking all of you for being here, and thank you to Inclusion London for all of the work that you do as London's DDPO in terms of advocacy, campaigning and policy development. In reading the manifesto for change that you've put forward, I can see what strong and powerful advocates you are for the community. It really is a call to action. This mayoral election on the 2nd of May is going to be a close 2-horse race between our Labour Mayor and the Tory candidate. The choice is clear. Sadiq Khan, who's focused on delivering for all Londoners, uniting our communities, or the Tory candidate who represents more of the same, Tory failure, incompetence and division that we've seen over the last 14 years. We have a direct choice. Sadiq's positive vision to build a fairer, greener and safer London, or a hard-right Tory candidate who doesn't share London's values. Sadiq has spent the last 8 years championing diversity and helping those who need it to get a helping hand. 1.2 million disabled people living in London, a diverse group with different needs. Sadiq has sought to include deaf and disabled people in decisions and is committed to the social model of disability. He's delivering free school meals for all primary school children in London and is now extending the policy for another year, saving families up to £1,000 per child. He started record numbers of council and other affordable homes and put accessibility at the heart of the London plan. He's got London building again. He's kept transport fares low and made transport more accessible with over 200 step-free stations across TfL's network. He protected the Freedom Pass from Tory government cuts and will continue to resist Conservative pressure to limit concessions. If he's re-elected, Sadiq will continue his work to make more of the transport network step-free and invest £3 million a year in providing public toilets on the TfL network. Build at least 40,000 new council homes by 2030, working with the Labour government, and continue to move the Met Police down the path of long-term reform, tackling institutional issues, including disableisms. Thank you for this opportunity. I really look forward to our discussion tonight. Thank you, Adam, Laura, and Svetlana, for welcoming here this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Andrew Boff, and I'm a Conservative member of the London Assembly. You know, there's no such thing as an average Londoner. Every single Londoner is exceptional. They have their own needs, they have their own lifestyles, and yet what we've had over the past 8 years from Sadiq Khan is pitching everything in on the average Londoner. So we've seen things like bus stops being put in that are threatening to blind people. We have seen instances whereby those people who need to use wheelchairs have found it more difficult to get around London as a result of the restrictions on where the black cabs can drop off. And we've also seen a situation where the mayor has constantly ignored disabled people. After the pandemic, which affected disabled people more than anyone else, I had to argue with him in public for him to have a representative of disabled organisations on the London Recovery Board. The thing is, he talks a good game. He is excellent at marketing. But only one of the candidates standing in this election you can guarantee will do what she says, and that is Susan Hall. Because the one thing that she has that the other candidates, especially Sadiq Khan, don't have, is she has the ability to listen. She will listen to Londoners and take decisions once she has listened. And there are plenty of ways, may I say, there are plenty of ways to keep Sadiq Khan in City Hall as mayor. You can vote Labour, you can vote Green, you can vote Lib Dem, you can vote Reform. All those measures will keep Sadiq Khan in City Hall. There is only one way to get rid of him, and that's by voting for Susan Hall. The three commitments that I know that she will carry out. First, and it's not the only commitments, but I was only asked for three. She will certainly scrap floating bus stops, and they must not be put in again. She will ensure that all the new developments at tube stations have step-free access. She's particularly concerned by the fact that the developments at Bank Station do not include step-free access. And the last thing she will do is she will listen, and she will listen intently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. I'm Hina Bakari, and I'm representing the Liberal Democrat Party. I'm really honoured to be here because I know that this is such an important subject to the Liberal Democrats. I actually asked Rob Blackie, our mayoral candidate, if I could do this hustings. This is why I'm here today. And I know that it's important for so many Londoners to make sure that London is accessible to all. I have been working with a group called the Disability Policy Centre, and their recommendations are very well represented in the manifesto from Inclusion London. One of the things that we will be doing and pushing for, and the commitment from us, is to make sure that there is a disability champion or commissioner to make sure that your voice is heard, so that when there is safety or transport or even access to work issues, you have a voice at the table. The Liberal Democrats want our stations to be accessible to all, and will be pushing for step-free access. Wherever there's a Liberal Democrat councillor, you will see them campaigning for step-free access at their local station, a freedom pass that they extended to 24 hours across TfL, and housing. Our third and main commitment to you is to make sure that there is more of it, and that it is safe, and that it is accessible. There has been a 10% target to make sure that housing is accessible, but that hasn't been met. We need to make sure that that is something that we will be pushing for. And I've been working with groups that Adam's involved with, CLADAG, to make sure that we have personal evacuation emergency plans for all disabled Londoners, and that all buildings are safe. Rob Blackie, our mayoral candidate, also wants to fix the Met and make you feel safer, which is why I focused my last set of London Assembly questions to the mayor on safety and the rising hate crime of disabled Londoners. And I want to make sure that you feel that you have your voice represented in these issues particularly, and that's something that I'm going to be pushing for and working with Inclusion London as soon as I can if re-elected in the London Assembly. You do have a choice on the 2nd of May. You can vote for on all three ballots, for the mayor, the constituency and the list. The Conservative vote is actually going down, so it's no longer a two-horse race. And we need to make sure that the mayor is held to account. So if there is a Labour mayor elected, and he doesn't deserve that third term, he certainly doesn't need more Labour Assembly members who are going to just rubber stamp every decision that he makes. Liberal Democrats will bring fresh ideas, push for change, real scrutiny, and making sure that every voice is heard. If you vote for the Liberal Democrats, you'll be able to get a real voice represented on all three ballots. So thank you very much, and Eid Mubarak.
Right, hello, I'm Zoe Garbett. I'm a white, quite short woman with short brown hair with a pink fringe, for those who can't see me. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Inclusion London for organising this hustings, because it really is an important part of this election cycle that you can hold us to account, and I am our Green mayoral candidate. You might not know much about me, so I'm going to do a bit on my background and then a bit about what my commitments are to you. So my public service runs through my family. Both my parents were teachers. My mum is Senko of a large secondary school, which instilled in me a passion for the public sector, for public duty and for inclusion. I worked in the public sector for over 10 years, all across London, holding senior roles in public health, adult social care, children's health services in the NHS, where I managed multi-million-pound budgets and delivered projects to address health inequalities, including working to improve health provision for children with complex care needs and SEND, which I did during the pandemic, which was, as you all know, incredibly stressful time for disabled people in London. So the same values that drew me to the public sector, which are of equality and fairness, led me to the Green Party, which I joined in 2014, because we understand that tackling inequality is integral to climate justice. I'm elected as a councillor with the highest Green vote in London. I listen to people, I act on what you tell me, and I have a strong track record of delivering for residents, which I've done in Hackney, and I'm ready to do more for London. We launched our manifesto yesterday, and if you've seen it, it's got equality and fairness running through it. The Green Party recognises the social model of disability, and a Green Mayor will ensure that everyone can benefit from inclusion, jobs, home skills, have a full life as independent as possible and free from discrimination. So I've got some areas of priorities which I hope we can get into later, which are in line with the manifesto that's been launched from Inclusion London. So I really care about affordability in housing, so getting the right homes for people that are accessible and at the right price, and making the city as affordable as possible by reinstating the 24/7 Freedom Pass and just working to bring in free school meals for primary and secondary school children. My second priority area, which I know is important to you, is safety. And I know that hate crime for disabled people is underreported and under-recognised. And I know that the Met's disableism was recognised in the Casey report, but is rarely mentioned, and the Met are rarely held to account on addressing their disableism within their service. So I will hold the Met to account to reform to make sure that disabled Londoners can trust that it's a service you can report crime to. And I will make sure that there's regular training on inclusion. And I will challenge all forms of hate. And the third section of priorities is all around your voice, your rights, and genuine co-production. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and that I work with in my roles in the NHS and local authorities. I've been really passionate about working with you and with people with disabilities, because you are the people that are experts in your own life. So we'd appoint a disability equalities champion. We'd strengthen the London Deaf and Disabled People's Forum, which we don't think has got enough teeth or meets regularly enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are now going to start asking questions to candidates on transport. I'm going to start with the first question, and then I'm going to open the floor and take questions from the audience. You now have 2 minutes to answer questions on transport, so please be brief and concise. We all want to be able to travel safely, affordably, and accessibly. Yet almost any outing can become a challenge because disabling barriers are everywhere. What actions will you take to ensure transport is safe, affordable, and accessible?
Thank you. We know that there's now 200 step-free stations across TfL's network, and a third of the tube network is now step-free. That's 33% increase since 2016, as well as over 60 stations on the London Underground. But there's so much more that we can do, and I know that Sadiq is working hard to see how soon more stations can become step-free. London's bus network is one of the most accessible in the world, and every bus in London is wheelchair accessible, and 95% of bus stops are step-free. TfL continues to provide a dial-a-ride service, as well as supporting the taxi card scheme that subsidises taxi journeys for older and disabled Londoners. And last September, TfL extended dial-a-ride hours to midnight 7 days a week, following reduced hours during the pandemic. Sadiq knows that access to public toilets can be a barrier to travel for many people, including disabled people. He's pledged to invest at least 3 million from City Hall in public toilets on the TfL network. And the study he's commissioned from TfL to get this moving is looking at the accessibility requirements as part of this. And of course, TfL has been working on a host of additional measures to improve accessibility, including the Please Offer Me a Seat badge, new moquettes on buses for priority seating, and improved disability equality training for TfL staff that I know Inclusion London is considering through your manifesto. Thank you.
Are we going down the line?
Yes, please.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
okay. One of the things that was brought to me the other day by somebody who's visually impaired was very concerned about the safety that he felt on the underground system because of the lack of help points, which many people with visual disability are dependent upon. If you go to Baker Street Station, for example, there's only one help station on 6 platforms. It's ridiculous. Currently, TfL will only consider increasing that support for disabled people once they come to a major renovation. And I think that's something that we need to attend to soon. I think we also, I know Susan will make sure that black cabs, which a lot of disabled people do use as the most convenient form for them, are able to use these same lanes that a bus can use, because not everybody can use a bus in a convenient way. And gradually we've seen those accesses for black cab drivers being reduced over the past few years. We will, of course, introduce, we want to see a greater consideration of neurodiverse people as well. Not enough consideration is given to the problems that neurodiverse autistic people have when routes are changed in London. There's not enough visual cues to allow them to make that change. With regard to toilets, well, I mean, I think the Lib Dems, the Conservatives and the Greens all actually agree, and it took about 2 years, was it? For us, I'm just seeing nodding from Caroline Russell in the audience. It took us 2 years to persuade Sadiq Khan to invest in these toilets, curiously enough, just before an election. But it's not just about toilets, it's also about changing room toilets as well, which are vital to many disabled people.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
I'll just quickly say that I've got brown skin, black hair, in a bun, wish I didn't have white hair, but I do, and a colourful scarf. I forgot to say that at the beginning. In terms of transport, floating bus stops, it has been a really controversial issue. So we will be pushing the Mayor to do a full review on this. But what we're really, really cross about right now is the fact that there's no tactile paving at the moment, even now. There's something he could do immediately right now to make it safe, would be tactile paving, which is what we've been pushing for. In fact, Caroline Pigeon, my Liberal Democrat Assembly member colleague, she's actually been pushing for tactile paving across London and all railway stations, because unfortunately there have actually been deaths because of the fact that people couldn't feel the end of the platform. So we are pushing for that. We want to make sure that stations are accessible. I know that the Elizabeth line has been considered to be a success, but unfortunately we actually found out that the Old Oak Common Station, which will be opening soon, will not be step-free access. So we're going to be making sure that that is going to happen, and pushing the Mayor to make sure that he has the funds and the support from the government to make sure that that is accessible. So, you know, that things aren't perfect. We will be pushing to make sure that we can do that for you. And also the Freedom Pass, we want to make sure that's back to being a 24-hour service throughout TfL. We are really concerned about Dial-A-Ride, which was just mentioned earlier. Now, again, Caroline and I have been seeing real issues with this. Under Sadiq Khan and Boris Johnson, unfortunately, this service has been letting down a lot of Londoners, even to a point where they can't be picked up at certain times. They've been having to reduce the times that they're out. So it's people during the Christmas holidays when they're having, going out to their friends and going to parties, only going for half an hour because the service wouldn't allow them to stay for the whole time. You know, things like that are really, really not fair.
Thank you, Hina. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. So this is a massive question, but I'll hopefully pick up on a few things and then we'll get into some more details. So I want everyone to be able to get out and about safely and affordably and in an accessible way. And the fact that you can't and miss out on the activities across the city and socialising and getting out just to run errands is shocking. So our whole approach to transport is focused on fairness. So I'll focus on a couple of bits. So in terms of accessibility, yeah, Caroline Russell, Assembly member, is in the audience of the Greens, sat on the left, putting her hand in the air, and did a lot of work to make sure that toilets are available on the public network, secured 3 million annually from the Mayor, but we're committing more funding for more toilets on the network so that people don't have to worry about being caught short when they're making journeys. So that's a big commitment from us. We also want a LUSAR to oversee this work and make sure it happens so there isn't any new build stations that miss out on that provision, and to just make sure we're getting that equalities issue and making sure those toilets are available. I also want to make sure that pavements are free from clutter and we've got all the drop curbs that we need. I've done a walk around with residents in my ward that are disabled and visually impaired to make sure that that's happening. And that's something we want to do across London, and to make sure that people are never waiting longer than 60 seconds at a light and have enough time to cross. We've also been holding the line bikes to account to make sure that they're not scattered all over the pavements and making sure that people are able to get through. On affordability, I'm really committed to bringing the fares down across the network. I think I'd love us to move to a really affordable transport system, but that starts with reinstating the free transport for 24/7 for older people and people with freedom passes and their carers to accompany them. I know that the question also talks about yeah, I wanted to talk a bit about buses and making sure that they've got more spaces for people with wheelchairs to be able to travel together, and we'd really improve bus stops to make sure there's much more seating and information at those. So yeah, look forward to follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am now going to take 2 questions on transport from the audience. Please be brief and concise. There will be time to ask questions to candidates on other topics later. So if you would raise your hands and I'll select someone. I know there are quite a few people. Is there a question from the front row here? Sorry. Can we get a microphone to...
Yes, my name is Hyacinth Malcolm, and the current mayor hasn't taken into account the safety of people who are blind like myself travelling independently. All the floating bus stop and shared bus spaces that's been put down is making it very difficult for people like myself to travel. It's no use saying they're going to review the safety. The safety should have been in place before. You know, it's just not, it's not, the bus drivers can't see us when we're standing across the road, so they can't pull up beside us so we can get on the bus or tell us what the bus numbers are. I'm just really tired of hearing inclusive. To me, it's not inclusive, it's unsafe and inaccessible for people like myself who are blind to travel independently. Thank you.
If we can take one more question, can I go to the other side?
Yeah, this isn't a question, it's a plea to Zoe to please speak much more slowly.
Sorry.
Because you are way ahead of the captions and I'm finding it very difficult to hear what you're saying, and I'm very interested in what you're saying, but if you could please slow down, I'd really appreciate it.
Apologies, I will do.
One more.
Could the Labour candidate tell me why the Elizabeth line is not level when the trains are not level with the platform? Certainly at Reading, there's several stations I personally cannot access. I've had a stroke. That the stairs are over and above, and you have to go down the other side. That includes Taplow, Maidenhead, and Slough. And is there any reason for the failure of the Elizabeth line not even to be level when the trams have been running in Beckenham, Croydon and areas like that for well over 20 years and they are level with the platform? Thank you.
Thank you. The candidates now have 2 minutes to respond. If we could start with Zoe and go to your right, please.
Thanks, and apologies, I do naturally speak quite fast because I'm very excited to share all my information, but I will speak slowly. Thank you for the questions. Firstly, about floating bus stops. So I agree with you that it's absolutely essential that consultation with blind, deaf and disabled Londoners happens from the beginning, and I think you're really right to call that out, that wasn't considered in the design. I'm really interested to see what comes out of the review. I want to make sure that the information that's provided to bus drivers and this training that happens to bus drivers is strengthened. And yeah, we just really need to make sure that that isn't a barrier for people travelling. And just on step-free access, I think, you know, Greens in the Assembly and our values, I think it's shocking when the accessibility parts of a design of a new build gets dropped, like the toilets or step-free access. And I think they are absolutely essential to be prioritised in anything that's built, and, you know, doing that retrofitting to make sure that as many stations as possible and, yeah, from train to street level is accessible.
Thanks. So just to reiterate everything that I said earlier about the floating bus stops, we're really not impressed by the fact that they have been so poorly designed. They should have had thorough consultation beforehand, and the fact that I've just raised that issue about the tactile paving is just a real indication of how poorly designed it was, and to think that even that it went ahead with with that lack of consultation at the beginning is really, really poor. So if the review does say that it isn't good enough, then they should go. They shouldn't exist. They should be redesigned. We should have a different way of making sure that everyone is feeling safe, particularly at bus stops. Pedestrians, cyclists, people with disabilities, they're all vulnerable road users. We need to make sure that we are listening to everyone. When it comes to step-free access, again, just to reiterate again, we are definitely pushing for this, and every time we see a problem like what I've just mentioned about the new station opening up, which will mean that the Elizabeth line won't all be step-free access at Old Oak Common, we will be highlighting that and making sure that we do push for step-free access there. And you'll see that across the board when it comes to disabled issues in terms of getting just thinking about disabled Londoners across the London transport system, we will always make sure that we're thinking about disabled Londoners. We've been objecting to the proposed removal of the day travel card. We objected to the closure of manned ticket offices. But we are also campaigners that pushed for guide dogs to be on escalators on the London Underground and making sure that taxis were accessible for all. So there are things that the Liberal Democrats do when we are in City Hall and in the London Assembly. Our position in the London Assembly is to scrutinise but also to push for change.
All I can say, Ms. Malcolm, you've hit the nail completely on the head. The problem has been is when these schemes have been put in, like floating bus stops, they've pitched them at the average Londoner, rather than taking into account the many disabilities that many Londoners do have. The problem is, where was the disabled person in the room when they decided to go along with this? Where were they? Because they weren't there under this current mayor. Where were the disabled people in the room when they decided to shut down access to Bishopsgate, to black cabs, without consulting, without any consultation with disabled people as to how that is going to affect them? Where were the people in the room? They weren't there because Sadiq Khan didn't let them in. Under Susan Hall, she will extend the consultation to ensure that every time a change is put in, that there is a disabled person giving voice to their particular interests. Because at the moment, if you elect Sadiq Khan again as mayor, you will be ignored time and time again, as you have been in the past.
Now, my question, Andrew, is to Johnson have to be kicking and screaming forward to make the stuff
I'm not here to defend Boris, and for those who know me,
that's right, but no interruptions on the audience. Sorry, Andrew. If we can move on to Sarah.
Sorry. Can people just speak when they have a microphone, because we have a live stream and it will not be accessible for those who use captions? Thank you.
Please do not speak over each other. Please do not speak, otherwise people with hearing impairments will really struggle.
What I'm saying is that all can trigger an epileptic seizure for me, and I prefer not to have an epileptic seizure today. Is there another way that we can let people know that their time is up, other than dinging that bell, which is dangerous to me?
I will raise my hand. I will raise my hand. All right. Thank you very much.
Sarah, over to you. Rachel, sorry, over to you.
Thank you. So Hyacinth, thank you for raising the issue of the floating bus stops. Sadiq is aware about the issues that people face with the floating bus stops, and that's why he's called for and implemented this review. And I know that in doing that review and undertaking that accessibility review, he'll be looking at all of the issues. And when that review comes forward, as some of the other panelists have said, we'll be seeking the views of all the stakeholders, and they'll be written up and published on the TfL website. And the actions recommended as a result of that review will be implemented. And that's important, that the implementation of that review is taken seriously. In terms of the step-free access, at those particular stations, I'd like to come back and give you the reasons and the particular reasons that those particular stations outside London were not made step-free, and I'm happy to come back to you on those specific reasons.
Can people only talk if they have a microphone? Sorry. It's just we have an online audience and captions there. It's not accessible.
Sorry. Yeah, just to go back to the floating bus stops, I think that those changes and the recommendations that might come forward would include design and how cyclists are going past. And so I think all of those, the full consideration needs to be made to the changes on those floating bus stops. It would be useful also to know regarding the public toilets, whether the candidates voted in support of the budget measures to bring forward the £3 million to invest in those
2 years ago we voted, all three opposition parties voted in favour of including toilets, including changing place toilets on the underground. And at that time, the only people who voted against it was who? The Labour members of the London
Andrew,
Assembly.
sorry. If we can now take one question from online and give the politicians 1 minute to respond to the question.
There's nothing
no
online.
Questions.
So we can take from the audience.
If we can take one more question from the audience. I think there's on the front row.
Hi, thank you. I'm a wheelchair user. Lots of the stations that are currently marketed as or advertised as step-free, we're relying on members of staff to put down ramps. And for me, that means it's not step-free, because if there is not a member of staff, which often at the moment there are not staff at particularly, there's quite a few stations on the overground, that means that that station is not accessible to me. As much as you might say it's a step-free station, it is not, because I'm dependent on another person letting me on. What will you do to protect the staffing of those stations where we are dependent on a member of staff to get onto that train?
The candidates now have 1 minute each. Rachel, if you would like to start.
Yeah. So thank you for that question and for highlighting the different ways in which stations are step-free and the ways in which stations should be made more accessible. As I've mentioned, in terms of the plans for going forward, Sadiq is looking carefully about the programme looking forward at further step-free stations. But in terms of at the moment, the stations are staffed to make sure that those where staff are required to make those stations step-free, they are already in place to ensure that where they have a role in keeping stations step-free, that they can support people for full accessibility.
It's absolutely vital that there are the trained staff to help disabled people with their journeys. And of course, there's a number of different obstacles for those who use wheelchairs on the underground system. Last year, there were 500 lift-out incidents on TfL. And that's why Susan Hall is committed to ensuring that there is a coordination between TfL stations to alert people as soon as possible when those lifts are out, because it means a very frustrating journey for those people who think that they can set off independently to get to their destination, only to be frustrated at the first or second station. So that's something we've got to do. Again, stop thinking about the average person and start thinking about the people who have the greatest difficulty in negotiating the transport system. And that's what Susan Hall will do.
I can only just imagine how difficult it is for you to get around London, anyone in a wheelchair. I have to admit that I do look for lifts everywhere I go, only because I have a bad knee. That's a minor issue, but the fact that I'm doing it, I can just imagine the impact it's having on you to have to think beforehand, make the calls to make sure there's somebody there at the station, at the platforms, to make sure that you can get on and off a train. It's absolutely awful, and I think one of the things that I was really appreciative of was being out, having the access and the time to talk to people. I was just mentioning about this report from the Disability Policy Centre, and one of the ideas on there that I thought was really, really interesting, which I thought I'd share with you, is having an app to report back accessibility issues, so that every time you found that there was a station that wasn't accessible, that you were finding there wasn't any staff at a station, there were, even a building that's not accessible, anything at all that makes your life difficult, then the app would be some way of alerting an institution like City of London, like the London Assembly, to make sure that things happen.
Thank you for the question. I think, obviously, from the beginning, and like we've been saying in the previous questions, we need to make sure that genuinely step-free is built in from the beginning, and we'll start, a massive programme to retrofit stations. But just making sure that those staff are available, I think, is vital. We do a lot of work with unions, making sure that the right staff are paid and have the right conditions to do the right work and have the right training that they need. So protecting staff at stations and just making sure people have people to speak to if they need, want to ask any questions or need that help, I think is absolutely essential. We also joined picket lines and the fight to protect the ticket offices and want to make sure that there's really clear information on those stations. The lift was out at the station at my ward that I'm a councillor in recently, and just people not having that information on the train and travelling without that information was really disruptive to people's travel. So, fully support making sure that we protect those staff, but making sure that stations are genuinely step-free. Thanks.
Thank you all. We're now going to start asking questions to candidates on housing. I'm going to start with the first question, and then I'm going to open to the floor and take questions from the audience. You have 2 minutes to answer the question on housing, so please be brief and concise. Many disabled Londoners are currently living in homes that are unsafe, inaccessible, and too expensive. Many of us have been waiting for years for safe and accessible property through the council housing waiting list. How will you massively increase the supply of accessible social rent homes in London? Can we start with Zoe, please?
So everyone has the right to a safe home that's affordable to rent and to heat. I'm regularly saying that London's beyond a housing crisis, and it's absolutely terrible that not enough is being done to fix it. We've seen failures at a national level. Greens would abolish the right to buy, which we've seen the leak out of council homes to private capital and leaving councils cash-strapped. So we think that's a policy that's really not good for Londoners and has really reduced the number of council properties that we've got. Greens and City Hall have pushed the Mayor of London to use money, and that councils can use money to acquire council homes that are up for sale, so not just depending on buying council property, building council properties, but making sure that we can buy homes that already exist, so we're getting them quicker, they're often bigger, and it just means that we can get people housed more quickly. We're also pushing to make sure that anything that is built has a higher percentage of genuinely affordable, and that's council properties in them. We don't think that shared housing, which is often shared ownership, is often called affordable, and developers are able to get away with including that in the affordable type of homes. But obviously we know that right now in London, the only affordable home is a council property. We also would push for at least 10% of units to be fully wheelchair accessible and push for more housing first provision too. We also oppose the demolition of council properties, which we've seen across London, often when residents living there do not want that to happen to their estates. And we know that that often results in they get replaced by luxury properties, not by the same amount of council provision. So we oppose demolition, and we want to take action on bringing empty homes into use too. We also want to make sure there's a London-wide register of wheelchair accessible homes, which I know is something pushed for by Inclusion London, to make sure we're actually keeping track of how many homes
Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you.
If I can hand over to Hina from the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Adam. Well, Adam and I have actually been working together in terms of in his role in CLADAG, because personal emergency evacuation plans are vital for disabled Londoners, and something that I've been pushing for within my role in the Fire Committee, and also making sure that disabled Londoners are protected from the cost of any remedial and safety works. Housing is such a major issue. 10% of housing should be accessible, and it's not been met. Those targets have not been met. So we are going to be introducing a London Housing Association, making sure that there is a good developer scheme, making sure that there is funding supporting legal advice, because I know a lot of people are going through all sorts of issues with their housing associations, and just having answers, you know, in terms of the legal issues are just absolutely mind-blowing how confusing it is. And to be able to give support for private and social tenants, having a housing first approach to avoid homelessness, and also making sure that there is just more homes. That's the key for us, that we have to make sure we are building more safe homes that are accessible for more.
The important thing about this is that when you try to pick out one particular sector of the housing problem, it often has implications on the rest of the housing issues. One thing we do know is that Sadiq Khan talks a good game, and in his London plan, he reckons that 10% of all homes are going to be, for example, wheelchair M4 accessible. But they are not. There are only 5% of the homes that have been built since 2016 have been M4 accessible. He also talks a big game and says that 3,500 supported homes will be built in London, and yet he's only allocated funding for 325. This talking a big game but not delivering is Sadiq Khan's special skill. Time and time again, he will give you the impression that he's hitting the housing programme targets. But those targets are about starts, not finishes. You can't live on a building site. You can only live in a completed home. And in that, he's doing much worse than his predecessor was in terms of completing homes. There's also, what kind of homes is he actually building? Of course, he's building an awful lot of tower blocks, and not very many family-sized homes. And the important thing about family-sized homes, low-rise, high-density, family-sized homes, is they are the most adaptable properties for when somebody with acquires a disability. So all in all, the focus again is on the average Londoner, and not the real need in London for more homes. And Susan Hall will address that.
Thank you, Andrew. Rachel?
Thanks very much. I'm really glad to have a chance to talk about this, because I think Sadiq and I know that the housing crisis in London is holding so many people back. I think it's holding London and Londoners back. So that's why Sadiq has really led the way on affordable and accessible housing, smashing the government's target of building 116,000 new, genuinely affordable homes, trebling the delivery from the level inherited from the previous mayor, in contrast to Tory ministers who've missed their own targets. When Boris Johnson left office of mayor, there were only 3 council homes left in the pipeline, not 3,000, not even 300, just 3. Sadiq has ushered in a new golden era of council home building and delivered 1,224 homes for older and disabled Londoners through the Care and Support Specialised Housing Fund. And he's put accessible housing at the heart of this. And looking forward, Sadiq's plan at City Hall are already looking to update the London plan. I think it's absolutely crucial that he'll be looking in detail at the needs of disabled Londoners through the planning system. He's absolutely committed to listening to your views going forward. And of course, we have our commitment for 40,000 new council homes built with a Labour government, which would be under the current London Plan requirements of 10% wheelchair accessible homes. And through that vision for delivering genuinely affordable homes, I believe that we can break down some of the completely damaging barriers that there are in place for London and Londoners with the housing crisis.
Thank you. Thank you all. I am now going to take 2 questions on housing from the audience. Please be brief and concise. If you can raise your hand if you have a question. Okay.
Hi. Discussions about housing and disability tend to focus exclusively on social housing. But there are a lot of disabled people who are private renters and also those who want to get on the property ladder. The average flat in London sells for over £500,000. If you are in receipt of a care package from your local authority, the maximum you can save without having that care package removed in its entirety is £25,000. So how is any disabled person in receipt of care expected to save enough for a deposit on even an average home in London?
If we can take one more question.
Thank you. My name's Georgina. My question about the housing. The London Plan kind of states that where estates are planned to be demolished, that only extra council housing will be built if possible. This isn't good enough. And it means that a lot of publicly owned land is now being lost to private housing when the most needed housing is social housing. I'm very fortunate to be a council tenant. It would be far better, in my opinion, yes, the right to buy should be abolished, but also council homes, instead of being demolished, they should be retrofitted and brought back as council housing instead of demolishing the estates. So where is the retrofitting agenda? And that also helps with fuel poverty, addressing fuel poverty more quickly.
Thank you. Is
and
that
the climate emergency. Thank you.
Andrew, if I could start with you, please.
Yes.
And work to your left.
Right.
The candidates have 2 minutes each.
Right, for the first question, of course, one of the problems that disabled people who are private renters also have is the condition of their properties. And it's been extraordinarily painful for a lot of disabled people to get the adaptations they need to their private rent properties. Susan, I know, has got a specific commitment to make sure that she's going to work with the government to ensure that those adaptations can take place for those private renters, because, and you're right, it's impossible. You know, buying a place in London, certainly central London, is impossible for most Londoners because of the inflated prices. And the inflated prices are because of supply. There aren't enough homes being built. And for them, while there are no homes, insufficient homes being built, the price will carry on increasing. So we have to pick up a pace in terms of not just promising homes, as Sadiq Khan has done, but actually deliver them, build them, actually get people into those homes rather than it just being a headline promise. With regard to Georgina, I must disagree with you on right to buy. One of the things about using housing funds, bearing in mind what I've just said, is that the cost of housing in London is due to the fact there's a lack of supply. Using those housing funds to buy back homes does not add to the supply. It just moves the deck chairs round on the Titanic. We've got to build more homes. And council homes have been a liberation for a lot of people since the policy was introduced. And there's no way I want to see the right to buy abolished. I do want to see it improved, and I would want to see local authorities using the proceeds to build new council homes.
We not only need to fix the Met, as I said earlier, but we need to fix housing as well. And that's why we're pushing for a London-wide housing association, a London housing service, so that Londoners really have got access to support, and the support is wide scale. It's going from pretty much every sector when it comes to social and private tenants as well. And one of the things that we will be doing is hopefully supporting local authorities to enforce private rented sector legislation. We want to abolish residential leasehold. We want to make sure that there's that all housing is built to has that 10% accessibility focus, but also making sure that there is more housing. And you were talking earlier about the need for that, and what we would like to see is a transformation of high streets. High streets have got an increasing number of empty buildings now, where there used to be shops. We can reinvent the high street by building and retrofitting and making sure those buildings are safe for housing. We also want to see a different approach to brownfield sites, increasing the number of brownfield sites for housing and development there, particularly near transport hubs. So there's a whole area here that we need to focus on, but mostly I think what I think many people are going to agree with this, there just isn't enough housing in London, and affordable housing that's suitable but for anyone, let alone disabled Londoners. So we have to do a lot better, and that is definitely our focus when we are in City Hall.
So I'm a private renter, and I know how insecure and unaffordable London feels, and the fact that I can't set up a permanent home somewhere that I love, I find incredibly distressing. So I do really appreciate the struggle of feeling insecure in your private rented homes. And we've been pushing the Mayor of London to back rent controls in City Hall and push for the government to give him those powers. That would make sure that, but the Greens would not wait about for those powers. I'd set up a rent commission immediately, which was full of private renters, so that we could start to discuss the model of rent controls that would work for the city. And then when we get the powers from government, after pushing for those powers, bringing in a 2-year freeze and then starting to bring rents down, because we need to take action on private rents. People are leaving the city. We've had schools closing because families can't afford to live here. So if we don't take action on private rents, then we're going to completely hollow out our city. And on retrofit, I agree with absolutely everything you listed in your question. We don't think that homes should be demolished. We absolutely think that we should be keeping them to a really high quality and taking care of the homes that we've got. Zach Polanski, who's also a Green Assembly member, who's in the room, has been pushing the Mayor of London to deliver on his promised retrofit revolution, which hasn't happened. Only 1% of homes have been retrofitted on his watch. We'd push for more people to be skilled in retrofitting so that homes are built to a better quality, so that, as you said, people's bills come down. It's good for the climate, but it's also making sure that people live in comfortable homes, and we're taking care of the stock that we've got, and we're not losing them. And I do think that acquiring homes and buying the properties we exist is a legitimate thing to do. Sian Berry on the Assembly secured 150 million from an underspend of a grant and got 1,300 homes back into use really quickly, so councils were able to buy them without having to wait to build them. So I do think it's a legitimate way of providing housing. Thanks.
Thank you all. Rachel's.
So I think it's worth acknowledging where there is cross-party agreement, and it's heartening to see that there's cross-party agreement for the appalling supply-side crisis that there is in housing. And on the question about the inaffordability of housing, we've got to remember that it was the Conservative government, coalition government, the Conservatives and Lib Dems that completely broke the delivery model for social housing in 2010, abolished essentially council rents, introducing the completely unaffordable affordable rent. So we have to understand the contribution that's been made to previous governments to this decision. But it's absolutely right to talk about market housing as well as social housing in this context. So we need to address the supply issues. We also need to look at ending no-fault eviction, which is something that the government has said it would do for a long time and hasn't. Leasehold reform, which would dramatically increase the accountability for leaseholders, and we're just waiting and have been waiting for years for that to happen. Georgina, in terms of your questions around estate regeneration, it was Sadiq Khan who brought in the votes about estate regeneration going forward. It was Sadiq Khan who brought in the transparency over viability assessments, which for far too long were holding back the delivery of genuinely affordable homes. They're now published. And it was Sadiq Khan who introduced a threshold for the amount of affordable homes that should come forward on every scheme. And it's those policies around estate regeneration, the voting, and also the transparency over viability that I think make estate regeneration accountable to tenants. We've invested 40 million in support to make homes warmer, and I think looking at our London plan policies on retrofit in the next iteration will be a really important opportunity to make sure that we're looking at the impact.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. And thank you all. We're now going to start asking questions to candidates on policing and crime. I'm going to start with the first question, and then I'm going to open the floor and take questions from the audience. The candidates will have 2 minutes to answer the question on policing and crime, so please be brief and concise. Too many disabled people feel unsafe in London. We experience abuse because we are disabled, and often we are not believed and supported by the police when reporting crimes. What are your plans to tackle disability hate crime in London? And what actions will you take to tackle disableism in the Metropolitan Police, alongside racism, sexism, and homophobia, to ensure that all disabled Londoners feel they can trust the police and report crimes? If we could start with Rachel.
Thanks. Sadiq and the Commissioner are clear. Disabled Londoners have been let down by the police, and a culture change is now required to address this. I think what's happened in the police and the experiences that people have had are completely devastating, and Sadiq has been Londoners' champion in terms of reform for the Met Police. Sorry, just carry on. He's developed an action plan to improve transparency, accountability, and trust in policing. We've heard already about the Casey review that Sadiq instigated into Met Police culture and standards, himself proposing Dame Louise Casey as a suitable lead. And when it was clear that the former commissioner was not acting to address the institutional issues that had led to a series of terrible scandals in the Met, he pressed for reform and a process that ultimately led to the former commissioner's resignation. And thanks to Sadiq's work to reform the organisation, the Met now has a new reforming commissioner and a new plan for reform, a new Met for London. Meanwhile, the Conservative candidate voted against difficult council tax decisions that Sadiq had to make to keep Met funding up, and cheered on the former commissioner as she presided over a series of terrible scandals in the Met. And she's blamed this issue of institutional problems on a few bad apples who should be dealt with behind closed doors. And Sadiq fundamentally disagrees and has been a champion for reform of the Met Police.
Thank you, Andrew.
Well, that's curious, because Susan Hall has committed to spend another £200 million on the police force. And part of that is going to be to address the culture problem that there is in the Metropolitan Police. You know, an old colleague of mine many years ago brought this up, and Victoria Borwick, who was a Conservative member of the Assembly a few years back, and she published a report called Hidden Hate about disability hate crime. And at the time that she was published the report, people couldn't believe that there were people who targeted disabled people for hate incidents. We now know that there are people who actually do that. And that hate crime needs to be recognised as a hate crime. And one of the things that the police do need to do is, if a disabled person is a victim of hate, a victim of a crime, the police should investigate whether or not disability hate was one of the motives. That, as a default, they should, and that's been a recommendation for a long time. Disabled people need better service from the police force, especially during such stop and searches. That a lot of those stop and search issues are going to be negated, because one of Susan's commitments is to ensure that every frontline officer has a knife wand, so no intrusive stop and searches will be required for knives. But the idea that Susan Hall is not behind the Metropolitan Police is laughable. It is Sadiq Khan who has constantly accused every single police officer of being either a racist or a homophobe, and brought down the confidence that those police officers have to deliver a safe.
Fixing the Met, but also making sure that that means there are more police officers that are more visible. Visible patrols on the British Transport Police, as well as the Met, making sure that there's more community policing, making sure that policing is done on a basis that they just get to know their communities better. And we have seen a rise in disability hate crime. It was reported that was 439 reports in 2018 that went up to 607 last year. But I actually think there's probably a lot more. There's a lot more, because I'm sure that people who are going through these awful incidents, the last thing they actually want to do is to go through that trauma again with police officers who don't understand and don't sympathise in a way that is appropriate when it comes to disability. What I think we should be doing is not only making sure that we have more visibility and also CCTV, also on tube lines, but public awareness on abuse for disabled Londoners and the kind of abuse that they face. We've talked a lot about race and hate crime going up since October for anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And I have myself had anti-Semitism training, and I know lots of people in the GLA have. But what about disability awareness training? What about making sure that that goes across the GLA with the Met, with TfL, with even housing and all those different areas that we've been talking about today? If we had more public awareness of what it's like on that receiving end as a victim, then I think things will really start progressing and changing for the better.
Thank you. Now, Zoe.
Thank you. No one should experience hate and discrimination, and I think the failings we've seen in the Met and just been discussed about recently, I know lots of people have just been experiencing for decades and decades, and I know how important it is that people hear the Met Commissioner recognise that they're institutional failings, and I know that the Met Commissioner hasn't done that, and I know that communities have found that really difficult. And as I said earlier, I think that the disableism within the Met often gets erased when people talk about the homophobia, racism and misogyny, and we need to make sure that we're still talking about the disableism within the Met and making sure that we're rooting out those bad officers, improving recruitment, making sure that they had the appropriate training, and also then training people across all services, so TfL, British Transport Police and all the GLA services, to recognise hate crime and be able to support and respond appropriately. So Caroline Russell, who I spoke about earlier with Toilets, the Green Assembly member in the room, worked with Inclusion London to make sure that we're challenging the new Met London plan to make sure it goes further in its reforms for disabled people. We also want to see we also want to look at what the Met are doing with their time, so improving the number of people, the officers who are in the Met, but also making sure that they're not in spaces that overly criminalise young people. Especially, we've talked about getting police out of schools and into neighbourhood teams, because we know from evidence from Liberty, the social justice charity, that the police being in schools often criminalises black young people, Gypsy, Roma, traveller young people, disabled young people, LGBTIQ plus young people. We know from those young people that they don't want police in schools. And we also want to make sure that there's more funding to organisations to help people better report crimes, because we know that's underreported. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you all. I am now going to take 2 questions from the audience. This section is not restricted to policing and crime, so feel free to ask questions about any other issue that may matter to you. Please be brief and concise.
Hello, I'm Jack Gilbert. I'm Chief Executive of Real DPO, and I've been an independent advisor with the police, unpaid independent advisor, for a couple of decades, actually. And so, in fact, there were, to the year at the end of January, there were 600 disability hate crimes for the million-plus disabled Londoners. And how many were actually sanctuary detections were solved? 9. 9 in the whole of London. And when I asked how many disabled victims of crime were they, the answer was the Met isn't properly registering the information of victims, so we cannot even tell how well it is doing. And we know from the ONS, Organisation for National Statistics, that disabled people are 2.5 times more likely, men and women, of being a victim of domestic abuse, are twice as likely to be a victim of violent crime, and are more likely to be a victim of ASB. So I'm asking the question, why isn't there a disability action plan, and would you, each of you, commit for your party to having a disability, like there is a race action plan, having a disability action plan in the new Met for London?
There is a question in BSL on the front row, so if I could take your question.
Hello there. My name is Tom Leishi. I'm Head of Policy for the British Deaf Association. And the Mayor of London in November 2023 signed a commitment to adhere to the BSL Charter from the BDA to work in collaboration with the deaf community leading on BSL in the city, and to develop a strategy for Londoners. So my question to each of you is, what would you do to support the BDA's BSL Charter?
Thank you very much. If I could start with Hina and work to the left, please.
So Jack, I am so glad that you raised this, because there isn't enough data or accurate data about hate crime towards disabled Londoners and wider. And yes, you know, I completely agree that we need to have an action plan in the Met. You'll get my 100% backing for that back in City Hall for the Liberal Democrats. And also, just to make this clear, out of everybody here at the panel, I'm number 1 on the Liberal Democrat London Assembly list. So out of everybody here, and probably more likely than anyone else here to get elected, hopefully, with your support. And that means that it's a guarantee that this will happen with my, you know, that I will do this work. I even talked to some colleagues here from Inclusion London earlier today, that the very first thing I want to do when I'm back in City Hall in May, hopefully back, is to work on this, and to work with all of the groups here represented today to make sure that we are raising this issue. It is not good enough right now that we have got rising hate crime towards this very vulnerable group, and that we don't even have accurate data on it. Yeah. All of that, absolutely. And again, for the BSL Charter, I was quickly flicking through this book again. I'm sorry to keep on going on about it, but it's got great recommendations. And this actually does have recommendations on the BSL Charter. So yes, we'll be totally supporting that as well. You may have noticed I was trying a little bit of BSL at the beginning. My daughter's 13 years old right now and has an app on BSL. She's teaching me. I haven't quite got there yet, but I'm getting there, and I promise you I will keep on trying and making sure that I keep on amplifying the need for BSL, and totally have my support with that charter, so thank you.
Thank you, Hina. Zoe?
Thank you. Yeah, I fully support a disability action plan and would love that to be co-produced. And as I said at the beginning, I said that it would be really good for the London Deaf and Disabled Forum to have more teeth. And I think having a co-produced disability action plan that you can hold the Met to account on is probably the best way to go. So it's not just a piece of paper that, you know, we can all agree to an action plan, but it needs to have a plan to be delivered. And I completely agree on making sure we've got the right data. It's the work I've done in the NHS addressing health inequalities to make sure that we're collecting information. I was doing work on LGBTIQA plus people to make sure that the NHS knows about the people that come to see them, and they know that who's getting their service and who isn't. And I think it's the same issue in a lot of our public services. And a similar response to the BSL Charter, I fully support the BSL Charter and making sure that all GLA services and everyone across London is working towards that. But again, I think that's something else that the Deaf and Disabled Forum needs to be holding us to account on, and has a space to make sure that we're regularly reviewing our progress in meeting the Charter, not just saying that we're signing up to it, but making sure that we're regularly reviewing our progress towards it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. Rachel?
Thank you, Jack, for that question. Those statistics, we should be constantly reminded of them. That's completely appalling in terms of the lack of information that's there and the outcome of that. I think there should be a disability action plan. I think the work that the new Met for London has been doing on engagement is absolutely vital, that it is that everybody gets a chance to contribute to the vision of a new Met for London, which is for everybody, and which takes those issues and gets to the heart of hate crime. Tom, in terms of your question, so Sadiq signed the charter, I think 7 or 8 months ago, and is currently in the process of working with the Deputy Mayor on inclusion, around consulting with local deaf people on a regular basis, and the requirements set out in the BSL Charter, and making sure that those are delivered. I think if you look at Sadiq's record, Sadiq has sought to include deaf and disabled people in decisions from City Hall consistently, establishing a quarterly deaf and disabled people's organisation forum to harness the experience and skills of DDPOs, which have such a vital and important part of London's civic life, as well as his EDI advisory group, which has members representing deaf and disabled Londoners.
Thank you. And finally, Andrew?
Mine's working. Jack, yes, simply. Of course, we're going to sign up to the Disability Action Plan. It has to be addressed, and we've been saying this as a Conservative group for many years on the Assembly, and while Susan is a member of the group, is that we need better records of the crimes against disabled people. And I know it's sometimes the disabled person themselves who doesn't want to be recorded as a disabled person. So there's all sorts of issues over GDPR and the right to people's information. And if you don't measure it, it don't get done. And I think this is an example of precisely that. With regard to the BSL Charter, yes, back in 2015, I authored a report on behalf of the London Assembly to improve access for deaf people to the health service. And one of the things that astonished me as a hearing person was that the services simply weren't there for deaf people. There are not enough interpreters. There is not enough training in the health service. We have situations where young people are being asked, children are being asked to interpret for their parents when receiving information about diagnoses from doctors. I mean, this is a ridiculous situation to be in. We need more interpreters, and absolutely we want to support the BSL Charter. Oh, may I also say, very quickly, if I've got any seconds left, if you want to know Susan Hall's attitude to consulting disabled people, she published a report 2 years ago called Breaking Down Barriers. And that report was about how in the future disabled people should be at the centre of decision-making.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you all. We've now come to the end of our hustings. I really want to thank everyone for joining us today. Big thank you to the candidates for being here and taking the time to answer questions. They've certainly given us food for thought. Thank you to Inclusion London for organising this event, and of course to all of you who joined us in person and online. Big round of applause. Please don't forget to go and vote for the Mayor of London on the 2nd of May. If you haven't already registered to vote, you can do so by midnight on the 16th of April. Don't forget to bring your photo ID, as voter ID is now a requirement to vote. Everyone's vote matters, so please go and vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you for chairing, Adam. Thanks for chairing.
And remember, hashtag...
Now you know what it's like chairing the London Assembly.
That's why it's a very difficult task. It's difficult, it is. Remember, hashtag no more no-shows.
Colour coordinating. I like your colour coordinating.
They're not safe, just given.
That safety are not taking blind, visually impaired access needs into consideration.
Right.
We've already made the conclusions, we've already been told, and carrying on thinking several persons, tactile will not allow blind people to access these businesses. They are being discriminated against for not being able to get to the health service, not being able to get to their gyms, not being able to get to their knitting shops,